There we go. So, Vish, thank you so much for being speaker here today. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce yourself and show us the cool stuff that you'll be sharing with us today.
All right, awesome. Well, Mark and team, thank you for having me out here today. Let me share my screen first, and then let me get started. Put this in. Okay. All right, so you're able to see my screen. So my name is Vish Reddy. As I was, I guess, chatting with you guys, my background has been primarily in networking and security technologies. Been in engineering and product for, I guess, all my working life. Except for the past year, we decided to go do something with Atlassian, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here talking to you about something which I learned and what inspired me and my co-founder to go build something, and hopefully this is going to be something useful for you. So what we're going to be really talking about, again, this is, I would say, part of it is applicable to Atlassian, but more so it is applicable to any of the other SaaS applications which you might be using as part of your work. Be it Office 365, which is pretty popular, or Salesforce. Some of the principles are similar. It's no different in Atlassian versus some of these other more popular SaaS applications. So getting right into it, I think four topics to discuss out here. What is the shared responsibility model? What does some of the big companies, including Atlassian, recommend? And then more so specific with what are some of the strategies which you could be deploying to protect your Atlassian data? And then lastly, we'll briefly talk about what Revyz does and how Revyz can help. And again, this is a small group, so please feel free to interrupt, ask a question, whatever comes to your mind. Would love the conversation. Now, this is a picture which you've probably seen in the past. Again, this sort of takes you through if we go from on-premises to the SaaS side of things, what are you as the either the administrator or the owner of that infrastructure, what are you responsible for? Obviously, in the on-premises side of things, on one extreme, essentially you're responsible for everything, starting off from the physical security to the building to the networking power. You're responsible for everything. And as you go through on-premises to co-location to hosting to the different as-a-service platform infrastructure and software as a service, the degree of responsibility which you have goes on changing. As you would imagine, in the as-a-service world, you're not responsible for the data center, the physical security of the data center, the networking which goes in there, the actual hardware which is getting installed and it is managed. That's all part of the ownership and the responsibility of the service provider. Now, what is very critical to note is, as you get to SaaS, you still have that ownership and responsibility on the data side. What data you put into that SaaS application, who has access to it, and how you use it is still your responsibility. So that's that's the picture. What this is showing you is, as you adopt different types of technologies, depending on where it lands up, your responsibility varies, but something which remains constant is that control over the data which you're putting in any of these models. So again, just making the point out here, in the SaaS world, who is responsible for the data? There's a common misconception, right? I have my data sitting in a SaaS application, and as a lot of y'all would have read, whether it is Azure, whether it is AWS, AWS very proudly calls out that there are 3 copies of your data sitting in their infrastructure. It may be in different data centers, but they do have 3 copies. But the question to ask is, yes, they do have 3 copies of your data, but if something goes wrong, does that mean that you'll be able to recover that data back? Because there are supposedly 3 copies of the data. Now, what they really mean by that is, and again, this is not me saying this, this is, you can talk to any of the analysts, be it Gartner or any of them. The 3 copies really exist for the disasters which the vendor might cause. There could be accidents which could be occurring. There could be hardware failures. At the end of the day, they're still running on the same or similar hardware. I shouldn't say same, because times have changed quite a bit. And so there are still failures which occur on your hard disks, be it a spindle drive or a static memory disk. In either case, there could be failures, and that's one of the reasons why the service provider has multiple copies of your data, and they are able to recover back the data when there are disasters which occur on their side. But if those disasters are or those accidents are something which you as a user or a user has caused, typically it's not an easy process to recover that information back. I just want to share with you what ESG, which is another analyst firm, what they found in a survey which they did in, I guess, 2019 and 2021, where essentially they're asking the question, who is solely responsible for the data which is residing within a SaaS application? As you would imagine, again, the common misconception which exists out there is it is the responsibility of the SaaS vendor to be completely responsible for everything which is residing within that SaaS application. This, you would want to see this number go down. So essentially, what the takeaway out here is, there's a sizable population out there in the IT side, in the IT leadership side, the decision makers who think that it is completely the SaaS vendor's responsibility. There are some, again, who think they're partially responsible, and then some of them think that they are completely responsible for the data which is residing in a SaaS application. Now, the same survey sort of lists out what are the top causes of data loss within a SaaS application. Obviously, any hardware failures or application related failures, which is typically the responsibility of the infrastructure provider or the SaaS provider, those scenarios of data loss are typically managed by the provider itself. So if you take those out, if you eliminate those out, then majority of the data loss scenarios in the SaaS world are driven by deletion actions. These deletion actions could be again, could be accidental, or they could be malicious. It could be a third-party application. It could be a script, or it could be misunderstanding of retention policies. Those are the different flavors of deletion actions which could come into play out here. Maybe I'll take a pause out here. Does this resonate with all of you all? I mean, we all use SaaS applications in either our personal lives or at work. Gmail or the G Suite product, again, that's a SaaS application which we use. What has been your experience? Have you lost any data because of the vendor doing something, or has it been your experience where you've gone and accidentally done, fat fingered? It happens. What has been your experience?
Yes, I've been on the vendor side, trying to mitigate data loss on behalf of a customer. But what I have also experienced is in Jira specifically, where you can go and you can run reports and you can look at, hey, I want to look at these issues for these epics or whatever the criteria may be in a JQuery query. And then if you do a bulk, delete or a bulk change or something like that, that affects the entire instance of whomever is using Jira. And that's happened to me before. So the challenge with that too is, how can you revert that if they're deleted? Do you have to talk with the Jira admin? Do you have to talk with Atlassian or something like that? So there are a number of different layers in which trying to resolve that was presented to us. But yes, I have unfortunately dealt with this, but I don't know about anyone else.
And I've seen the same thing. One of the worst instances I've been through is a Salesforce breach, where because that was totally something that was avoidable by configuration mistakes of the admins. But the bigger part of it is that it's when you have to have the conversation with the vendor to say, all right, I need all these logs. I need to understand how much does this sprawl, and that's when you really find out how much the vendor actually can help in those situations. This was back in like 2014 or so, 2015, when and at that time Salesforce didn't even have a real product. So yeah, it can definitely get difficult when you from a breach standpoint, but that's when you really understand that you got to have your data buttoned up and you got to have some kind of plan in place for how you're going to control that data, so that if you do have to do any kind of restore or anything like that, you're not so beholden against on the vendor.
About 2 years ago, or maybe 2.5 years ago, there was a big write-up, and this was, I think, this was KPMG. The Microsoft administrator for KPMG, he fat-fingered something on Teams, and a whole bunch of Teams accounts disappeared. And KPMG, as you can imagine, thousands of users, large consulting company. It's there. I think the register and a couple of the other tech media folks covered it, and Microsoft unfortunately could not help them. I think that's why it became even a bigger issue. So yeah, I think we all have seen, gone through different experiences with regards to data loss, and primarily it comes from deletion events. Again, deletion accidents, be it malicious too. And I'll give you a personal example of what I've seen on the malicious side, at least, having been in the security world for many years. Of course, if there is data loss, again, depending on what industry you are in, and the averages which people call out as loss of data, again, depending on how you measure it. Obviously, there's a loss of revenue and reputation, productivity loss. Again, if you're in a regulated space and if that information is very critical, there are compliance-related obligations and fines which start to play in. Now maybe getting back into the Atlassian side of things, from what I've seen at least, and what I've seen in the community pages, what people post, typically people put in Jira is used in various different ways, as a lot of you probably have seen, using it for your software development activities. In some cases, it's also used for onboarding new employees. So there is a lot of HR, PII type of information which is stored out there. You use, I know of one company which is in the travel space. They actually use both Jira and JSM for sort of managing their customers, the bookings and so on. So it's used in different, I guess, different customers use it in different ways. I think Mark and Patrick, you guys, sorry, Mark, you were talking about Salesforce. Obviously, Salesforce, it's critical data. You have a lot of customer information stored out there. Do you see, I mean, when you lose Jira data, is that a critical event from your perspective, or is it, it's not that critical? Maybe Lucas or Mark.
Well, it can be for sure. I mean, I haven't really experienced that kind of loss, but I mean, if you have, I go to Lucas's point, you have something where somebody goes in, the most common like mass disruption would be the bulk change and mistakenly set a whole bunch of data. You can totally set software teams back in their timelines on their ability to deliver. And not to mention if I haven't seen like somebody just like flat out killing a project or anything to that extreme. I think and in my environments I lock down the configurations pretty well, but I think the main thing I've seen is the user error side, and the critical aspect of it is that you can really, especially if you're working on a product and your goal is and that product has direct revenue ties, then Jira becomes very important very quick.
Yeah, right. Since I was going to be talking to you guys today, so I thought, okay, let me just go look up what have been the more recent postings on the community side. Now, what I thought was interesting with these two screenshots which I've put out here is one is a user driven deletion action. Another one is a project admin driven deletion action, which they want to revert back. Now, in both these cases, you could minimize, as Mark, you rightly pointed out, I think the best practice is to go, follow the principle of least amount of privileges which you're going to provide to those users. Then the question comes up, what do you do with your admin? And even so, take the site admin. Somebody's going to have the keys to have that God power, right? Going, and you can go and do a lot of damage. So how do you overcome those? And who is responsible for this? Personal example out here. Last year, I was working for an email security company. That company got bought over by another large private equity company. Not many people were happy within the organization. I was on the product side, so I would look at my roadmap. Every week we would go, where are we? What more needs to be done? So that's something which I would keep track of. And after the acquisition, I started seeing, tickets disappear. And I used to start, it made me wonder, am I becoming too old that I saw it a couple of days back and now it's not there? And so I started inquiring about, with others and saying, did you guys see this? Where is this ticket gone? I remember this. And eventually I took a screenshot of one of the board out there. And 2 weeks later, when I go look at it, one of the tickets is missing. And then we started investigating to see what happened out there. Unfortunately, as probably you know this very well, even so more than me, when something gets deleted in Jira, there is no audit log for that event. And it is gone instantaneously. And so we tried reaching out to, our IT team reached out to Atlassian support to see if we could get something out. Unfortunately, we couldn't retrieve that back, that piece of data back. And so this is a case of a malicious insider, wherein there were, and we could never figure out who was doing that. I guess the lesson learned at that point was, okay, let's go and lock up the tenant, make sure the privileges are at least locked up, so that then it narrows down the circle, right? Like how many people have access to the deletion privilege out there. So again, depending on the type of disaster which we are talking about, in this world of shared responsibility, yes, there is a responsibility of the SaaS vendor, and then there is the responsibility of the user. As we talked about earlier, when it comes to things which happen within the data center, let's say a server goes down or a hard disk goes down, and there is a data loss situation because of that, that typically falls under the realm of the SaaS vendor. If there is a data breach or a data center breach, that again is the responsibility of the SaaS vendor and the infrastructure provider. Now, what happens more frequently, at least based on my experience, and please add in if you think otherwise, typically the more common things are small things get accidentally deleted. Even a bulk change in the bigger scheme of things, even a bulk change you do, again, it's not that your entire tenant is going away. It is a portion of your tenant is being, or the data within the tenant is being affected. So it's typically human error driven, followed by, sometimes you're overwriting something, some data corruption, import type of issues. And then, of course, your malicious deletions. Malicious could be two forms, especially in today's environment, where ransomware account takeovers are pretty ripe. And a lot of people don't talk about it. Obviously, there's a reputational impact. No company goes and says, I've been hit by ransomware. Most of them never bring that up at all, because it's got a much bigger impact. And so in those scenarios, malicious deletions, be it insider or an outsider coming in and doing something bad to your data, be it Jira, be it Office 365, be it Salesforce. I think these are some of the things through which there could be a data loss. Again, another story, a couple of years back, I used to work for a data backup company where we had, and this is an engineering company based out of Minnesota who was our client, and the administrator's credentials got taken over. The attacker was pretty smart in going and figuring out, where, how to get into the Office 365 administrator console. And essentially they went and created havoc by going and deleting a lot of the data which existed in your SharePoint and OneDrive and so on. Luckily, they had this company was taking backups, so they could recover things back. But the attacker was, pretty smart enough to get access to the admin's credentials and then go create that havoc out there. And then lastly, again, things which occasionally do happen is if you have third-party applications which are interacting with your primary data, there could be, mistakes made in terms of a software upgrade. That application or script could be misbehaving, which could again lead to a data corruption type of situations. All right, so now getting into what do other large SaaS vendors recommend. Again, it's very similar, be it on the Microsoft side or on the Salesforce side. Again, if we go back to that first picture, which I was sharing, if you go from on-premises to SaaS, essentially what Microsoft is saying is, look, in the SaaS world, you as the owner or the administrator for that SaaS application, you're responsible for who has access to that application, the security of that endpoint and the hygiene of that endpoint, which is from which that SaaS application is being accessed. That is something that is your responsibility. If it is not secured, if again, if there are malicious attackers who can attack that machine and then get onto get access to the SaaS application, that is not part of the SaaS vendor's responsibility. That is you as the owner or the administrator of that tenant. It's your responsibility. And then lastly, what data you put in, how you manage that data, again, that is your responsibility. This is true with Microsoft. This is true with Salesforce. And it is it is true with Atlassian too. In fact, I don't know if you've seen this. Atlassian updated their shared responsibility document recently. They published an upgraded version of the white paper. Again, it has got something very similar. Essentially, maybe without getting into the details, again, 4 key things which Atlassian is asking you as the Atlassian administrator to be cognizant of and be responsible for. One is making sure that the data which you're putting into the Atlassian application is complying with the rules of the land where you're operating. Second thing, just like Microsoft, again, Atlassian calls out the fact that you're responsible for protecting those endpoints and having good security practices and hygiene, so that there is no misuse of that endpoint to access, Atlassian's application. And then who has access to the SaaS application, ensuring that they have the right level of access. I guess this is where the principle of providing the least amount of privileges comes into play. Depending on who the user is, what their role and responsibility is, you want to provide the appropriate privileges for them. And then from an information security perspective, make regular backups of your data to ensure in the case of an accident, you can recover your data back, or at least have access to it, and so that you can put it back into your tenant. And then lastly, on the marketplace apps, ensuring you review each of the marketplace apps which you're planning to use. Look at how they are going to be using the data. The reason why this is important is if you go back to the different causes of data deletion, or one is human errors, be it accidents or malicious. The second is third-party applications going and doing something which you don't expect them to do. And that could happen because of software upgrades, many different reasons why that could happen. And so understanding the add-ons or the plugins which you're using within your Atlassian environment from the marketplace, I think it is good to understand what kind of data do they have access to and what do they do with that data. And then, of course, being a good citizen, reporting back to Atlassian if there are any malicious behavior which you see with regards to marketplace applications. One thing maybe I just want to touch upon out here is this is sort of documented in the security practices page on the Atlassian site. Again, this is no different from any other SaaS vendor. As we were discussing earlier, there are 3 copies of data, at least 3 copies of your data sitting in various places. Atlassian is also built on AWS, so obviously there are those 3 copies of data sitting. On top of that, if you review the security practices which Atlassian calls out, Atlassian does take, I think every day they take a backup of their entire infrastructure, and those backups are kept for 30 days. But those backups are only used for things which, their scripts or, something which went wrong with their application. If you recall back in April of this year, just around the time of Team 22, there was an outage. And, for some people, it was a short duration without any data loss, but for some, I think close to 800 or so customers, that was a much longer period of duration in which they were impacted. I think for some, they couldn't recover the data back to. And so this is where Atlassian clearly tells you that it is, I guess, your responsibility to manage your data, make a copy of your data, and then also ensure that the right people have access to that data. Now, maybe getting into some of the strategies or or things which you could be doing to protect your Atlassian data. I think, Mark, you mentioned earlier in all your in all the Atlassian setups you manage or you've been involved with, you ensure that you lock it up and provide the least privileges, so that even if somebody accidentally tries to do something, you still don't lose that data. Again, depending on who the user and what the privileges you provide, the scope of impact or the blast radius of that data loss could vary. If you're the user, then obviously, again, based on the permissions you give, that's the extent to which that data loss could be. If the user just has the permissions to, let's say, delete the comments or attachments which they add in, then it is limited to that level. If you don't limit that, then obviously that has a bigger impact. If you are the project admin, if the permissions which are provided to that project admin are beyond the scope of the projects which they manage, then obviously the blast radius is much higher. And then, of course, the site admin has much larger access. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the permissions would help you sort of manage the scenarios wherein you can sort of minimize the number of accidental incidents which might be occurring. But then if there is a malicious insider or an outsider who can get privileges or change the privileges based on what their eventual goal is, that could potentially have a bigger impact. So with that said, what are the different things which you could be doing to sort of manage and protect your data which is residing within the Atlassian applications? Of course, one of the strategies could be do nothing. Nothing wrong with it, except that you wait out with the risks which it poses, right? If the data which you're adding in or creating is not that critical to you, that's not a bad thing to do. Do nothing. On the other hand, if that data is important, then you may want to consider doing one of the things which are listed out here to sort of minimize or reduce the risk which is associated with potential data loss. One of the first things would be controlling access, which is what we discussed earlier. The second being exporting out data, making regular copies of your data using CSV exports. The next one being exporting out the entire database. And then last being having some sort of a backup as a service. I'll pause out here, maybe comments from the audience, and are there other things which you could be doing besides what I'm at least proposing out here?
I was just going to say that I am glad you put access management control in there. And I know Mark alluded to it earlier as well, but least privilege access management, I think, is a good start to at least whittle down the number of people that have, write permissions, I guess. But yeah, I don't think that nullifies the need for a backup, especially if Atlassian recommends it. Because I think in the previous slide, I forget what it stated, but they don't back up like overriding fields. They simply take a snapshot of, I don't want to misspeak. You're gonna have to go all the way back, sorry. We do not use these backups to revert customer initiated changes. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so, okay. No, I think where I was going, Lucas, are there other strategies, right? You can do an export of your data every so often. You can do a database backup. Obviously, the access management part is sort of basic hygiene, right? You have to lock it up. Otherwise, that's just exposing out, you're increasing the risk out there. Are there other things which you could be doing besides, I guess, a database backup, a CSV using a backup as a service.
You could also, another important part kind of plays in with the, I'd say in between access management and CSV exports is defining your sources of truth and not having multiple sources of truth, so that if something bad happens with Jira, like the data breach or something like that, it's not copying, it's not covering data it's not supposed to have.
Got it. Yep. Great point. I think if we think of from a security perspective, the CIA part of it, right? Confidentiality, integrity. So I think you're hitting on the integrity piece, having a single source of truth and understanding where the truth lies and how the data should be. All right. I tried sort of putting out a pros and cons for each of these different options which you as an administrator may consider. Again, there is no, again, depending on your situation, right? There is no right or wrong answer. It all depends on what situation you're in, how important, how critical is the data, and you will be weighing that along with, I guess, from a risk perspective and the return of doing a certain action. I'll skip, I guess, do nothing, and we've talked about access management. CSV exports, typically it's manual. Yes, in some cases you can go write in scripts to do that, but again, those scripts have to be maintained for the most part. It is hard to catalog the data, and what I mean by cataloging the data out here is searchability. If you have exported something, how easy is it to go and search the data? Because if you really go back, I think a couple of slides, what I was talking about, the type of accidents or the type of different types of deletion events. When it comes to human error, it's not that. Yes, it does happen. Your entire project, somebody could be deleting it or modifying it, bulk changes. But most of the things which change or get overwritten or deleted, these are smaller things. Maybe it is 10 tickets or a couple of attachments. Yes, in rare cases, it could be the entire thing. So in those scenarios, search or cataloging the data which you have becomes critical. Data coverage could be limited because not all objects can be exported out from your Jira tenant as a CSV. There are limits in terms of what you can export out. A simple example would be attachments. It's not that easy to export out attachments as it is to create a CSV. Granular restore, again, this goes back to the point I was making earlier. Small errors which occur, deleting of one or two things. Can you, from that CSV file, can you just extract out, let's say, one ticket and put it back? Yes, that is definitely possible. Of course, there's some amount of work which has to be done. The work which has to be done is finding that ticket in the multiple sets of CSV files which you have created, and then taking that specific row or multiple rows and putting it back. Yes, it's definitely possible. Is there a loss in data when you try putting things back in? And what I meant by that is, and maybe I'm not saying it or not captured it in the table in a very good manner. Say, for example, you took a CSV backup on November 1st, right? And then you discovered on November 10th that you need to get something back in. Now, you can go in and get that, that one row or 10 rows, whatever the case may be, and put it back in. There is no disruption to your site. All the changes which have occurred between November 1 and November 8, although the backup was taken on, or the CSV file was created on November 1st, the data is not, everything is not overwritten. And that's what I meant by restore data loss. And of course, there is no system downtime while you're uploading or extracting those 10 rows of data from your CSV file and putting it back. There is no system downtime. Now, the reason why I put those in there is when you do a database backup, there is going to be some amount of system downtime, meaning your production tenant, if you're restoring the database back for your production tenant, then that production tenant would not be accessible by your users when you are restoring back that entire database. There will be a restore data loss. Again, the example which I was giving earlier, wherein you took a backup of your database on November 1st, and on November 10th, you want to roll it back to what it looked like on November 1st. Essentially, to recover back whatever you lost, you're going to be losing more data, or you'll be losing some amount of data, I would say, because all the changes which have occurred in that system are going to be overwritten. With a database restore, it is all or nothing. You get back all the records which were there in a certain condition at a certain point of time when that backup was taken, versus if you don't restore it back, it's all or nothing, right? Now, for whatever reason, Atlassian has got limits in how often do you take the database backup. If you need it with attachments, it's every 48 hours. Otherwise, if you want to skip attachments, then I think it's a 24-hour cycle. Now, database backup also has got its pros, meaning it covers all the various objects within that database, within your site. Of course, now one could argue and say, look, it doesn't cover any add-on data information. I agree to that. Probably I sort of skipped it from the scope of at least this conversation, because add-on data, it's got its own, because there is no standard way to access that information, pull that information from the marketplace apps, from the vendor's infrastructure. Now, searchability within a database, within a database file, I should say, the one which you create, that is hard to go and catalog. Knowing what is inside that is hard. And then lastly, this is a manual process for the most part. You could script it based on unpublished APIs. I think some people have done it. But then there are other considerations, security considerations, which would also come into play at that point. So then that leaves us with the last one, which is using backup as a service. Again, it's an automatic process. Data management, again, it automatically gets cataloged. It becomes easy to search. Data coverage is not as great as a database backup, because that is limited by the number of public APIs which Atlassian, in this case, Atlassian has published. All objects do not have the required APIs. As an example, I think if you think about the statuses, you can retrieve statuses, but you can't programmatically go create statuses. So there are limitations out there, but they have a pretty good coverage. For the most part, I think I would say from 80 to 90% of the objects are covered. There are probably some exceptions in there. In terms of export limits, there are none. As long as you're adhering to the API throttling rules which are there, you can pull out as much as or as little of data as you want using the APIs. This also allows you to put data back in a granular manner. You can put back entire projects, or maybe just the attachments or just the comments. And this could be done live, while your system is in production. There is no need for a downtime, or there is no data loss as it might occur with a database restore. Again, we're a small group. Do you guys see it any different, or what are your thoughts in this comparison?
Anything
makes
that's
sense
not
to me.
manual. Sorry, Mark.
No, good.
I was gonna say anything that's not manual, aka automatic, or the backup runs at a certain interval, I think would be a win. I haven't had to do any like CSV exports, to be honest, but I would want to if I had to. So I like how you show it here too, with all the different areas and the limitations for each method.
Yeah, and that granular restore is huge. I back up the database. In fact, I've got one running right now. And I just kicked off as we were talking. But even that, I don't think it has granular restore. So you pretty much, you have to restore the entire database, as I understand. So that granular restore to me is huge. That's a huge benefit there. And then the automatic aspect of it too, because I looked last time I backed up was in May. So, it's it only happens when I think about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, backup is for the most part insurance, right?
Mhm.
We hope we never use it, but the day we need it, we better have that insurance. Otherwise, they're in trouble.
Yeah, and without being able to do a granular restore, you might end up eating your losses because no other projects, want to do a restore.
Right.
So we've got a lot of projects. And just because somebody may have gone rogue on one project, the others might all be fine, and they may, say, we don't want to lose, the last week or months or even in my case, 6 months worth of data because one project got deleted. The data got deleted. That bulk delete, I would agree, is probably the biggest risk factor. The projects, they hang out there for a little while, but anyway, I love that granular restore.
Yeah, so I think now I'll get into the last part, which is the part which we've gone and built. Again, just recognizing that there is this issue. Again, as I mentioned, my background has been in security and networking. One of the companies I worked in the past was this company called Drua, where we actually built I think we were one of the first vendors to build an Office 365 backup. And then we also did Salesforce, Google. I think I'll sort of credit them the idea. That's where I got the idea of saying, oh, the same problems exist with Atlassian too, or I'd say same challenges. And, that's what led us to building a system which helps you automate your backup and allow for granular restore. I won't go into more details. My goal, at least for this audience, was to talk about shared responsibilities and what some of the things which you should be keeping in mind. But I guess a plugin is the app which we have built out helps you address at least some parts of the shared responsibility, which is in protecting your data. Obviously, you would have to be responsible for who has access to the data. And all the, following the principles of least privileges and so on and so forth. I think I'll pause out here unless, if you, I'm happy to answer more questions on how the data backup works if somebody's interested in, but I wanted to more talk about the shared responsibility piece, I think, which is what we covered.
Just a quick question on the solution here is, when you talk about granular backup, I've deleted ABC-123. When I restore it, does it come back as ABC-123, or does it have to be created as a whole new issue key?
Yeah, that great question. Unfortunately, if you're putting it back into the same project, you will never get that 123 back. Now, having said that, I think there's a ticket in the Atlassian roadmap, or at least in the publicly facing thing. It's been gaining momentum. I think a lot of people have been going and upvoting the need for maintaining that ticket ID. Given that we are part of Atlassian Ventures, I've been I think in close contact with the engineering and the product team, which is responsible for the backup and restore capabilities. They do plan to bring out new APIs sometime middle of next year, which they say will solve this problem of maintaining the ticket ID. Right now, they have an EAP early access version of the CLI version of the backup tool. I think the APIs are going to come next. So when those APIs come out, we will implement those APIs and we'll try to maintain those. I mean, we'll ensure that the key ID is maintained. But right now, no. Today you can't, unless what you could do with what we have built out is you would then have to delete that entire project. Let's say that project had 10,000 issues, or whatever that number is. You delete that entire project, and then you restore that entire project back from the backup. At which point it's like creating a new issue, and of course we go in that same sequence as it is there in the backup, and so then you can get back the original ID. But there's a sort of a con to that too. You lose the timestamps. Again, depending on what you want to maintain. If the ID is the most critical thing, this is sort of a workaround, not a clean way. But for some use cases, such as e-discovery and things like that, where timestamps are very critical, you sort of lose the timestamp.
Yeah, I think in most cases you don't necessarily need the key, because you're typically doing your queries based upon like when it was created, when it was resolved. So as long as you're able to restore that critical those data points, then you can always find your way back to the issue at hand.
One of the things which we noticed was, which we were not doing, and we just added that in, which is if you take an epic, you delete an epic, and then the epic has got a whole bunch of other stories, or even a task and a subtask, linking all of those things back automatically. That could be a painful thing, trying to figure out, what are the linkages and then putting it back. So we just sort of made it easier by automatically linking things. If you're restoring back an epic, we'll just link all those things back, as they existed before. Of course, the ID would be new, but at least you'll get back all the linkages. I guess, happy to take any other questions on top security or data protection. If none, then I really appreciate you guys taking the time to join in this meeting today to talk about shared responsibility and data protection.
That was great. Thank you very much. Very insightful.
Yeah, thank you, Vish. It was. I think that a lot of times we get caught up in the like different features, and this is a nice little change up on what we typically talk about. It's equally important.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to meet each of y'all in person. I think Team 23 is coming up. If you guys are there, would love to meet with each of y'all in person.
Working on making our way to that one. Let's see if that one's. I definitely want to go this year.
Yeah, awesome.
All right, I saw that since from a little bit in that we had Dan join us. Dan, good seeing you.
Good to see you too, Mark. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a brief little chat with Patrick right before. Jeff, I didn't want to leave you out. I know you're LA. Where did you say you're working?
I'm over here in El Segundo.
What's the what company?
Teledyne Controls.
All right.
I should probably put up a thing in the background so you can see, but yeah. I was just going to ask Vish one question real quick. Do you guys have any plans on your roadmap for, expanding beyond Jira to do like Confluence at some point?
Yeah, absolutely. I think step number one, right now we have, so the app which is there in the marketplace does Jira software. We have the JSM version in beta. I think sometime next year we'll be focusing on Confluence. We're trying to sort of, get all the use cases. I know it's a little bit different in Jira and Confluence, but for the most part, there are similarities. So you want to sort of iron out all the things on the Jira software and JSM first, and then move on to Confluence. But absolutely, Confluence is on the roadmap. The other one, which I'd want to call out, I know you didn't ask this, but I'll put this out there because we're all in the US, so nobody has a problem with storing data in US East 1 and AWS. So, that's not an issue. But if you go to Europe or Australia, they want their data to be, the data sovereignty is important. So I think later in December we're going to be supporting. I think Atlassian supports Frankfurt. If you have tenants within in the EU, then your data is pinned to the Frankfurt data center. So we'll be supporting the same. And then maybe one other thing to call out is Atlassian is going to be coming out with this feature called Bring Your Own Key. I think people have asked for it for a long time. It's essentially making sure any data which you put in within Atlassian, it is encrypted, and you as the customer have control of that access. So nobody can actually, even within Atlassian, can't go and access that data. And so I believe they come out with that feature support sometime middle of next year or towards the second half of next year. From a backup perspective, we also will be doing the same. So essentially, the encryption key is going to be in the customer's control. If they revoke the encryption key, what is left with us is a bunch of bits, which you can't make out anything from it.
Okay, good. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I've got a question regarding the pricing. One challenge that I have with Jira is just most every app, or add-on app, is the pricing is always based per user. We've got like 1,500 users, so I just did a quick pricing. I mean, it would cost basically like $2,500, more than $2,500 a month, $27,000 a year, for this. Do you have different pricing models, like that a little bit more, fixed, more data center oriented prices? Because there's honestly a lot of add-on apps that I'd love to get, but because their pricing is per user, it's just not feasible.
No, it's so ideally what we would want to do is price things on databases, right? Like, I mean, the volume of data. That's essentially
that'd be great. Yep.
Right? Yep. But in the marketplace, and this is probably the reason why every app is on a per user basis, is because that's the only licensing mechanism which Atlassian supports today.
Yeah, I see.
So you're sort of tied. If you're buying through the marketplace, then that is the only licensing mechanism which we can't put in a different metric, unfortunately. Now, having said that, happy to see. I mean, if you try it out, if you think there's something useful, we'll figure out a way to make sure that this is something which is reasonable.
Okay.
Is there an option for marketplace apps to be able to do something where it's like you kind of show free on the marketplace, but then you have to have some kind of like license key that's negotiated with the vendor, or is that completely out for the way that they build out the APIs?
Now, I think the one other thing which some other app vendors do is you can see it as free. I mean, you'll see some free apps. What that free is really, again, there are some truly free apps, but then there are some which give you a trial, and then you work with the vendor to sort of license it. So there you can have your own, I guess the vendor will have their own licensing metric. You can move away from, what shall I say, users. It could be something else. Now, in our case, we chose to go down this route because number one, there are a lot of benefits to be in the marketplace. One is the security benefits which you get because you don't have to, you get that validation from Atlassian and in what we are doing from a security perspective. So there are those benefits which are there, and also from as an app vendor, it helps us focus on building the product versus otherwise I had to have a billing system, a licensing
Right,
system.
that's huge.
Right. So that's why we chose. Again, I'm just sharing my experience as to why we decided to go down this route. Now, you're absolutely right. I guess again, based on my previous experience in doing data backup, it's typically you go with data volume. But yeah, in this case, we're tied. Now, I know Atlassian is going to be coming out with tiers of, so just like how you have standard premium enterprise for the Atlassian applications, they will be allowing, I think, 2 tiers for the add-ons too. I believe that is going to be rolled out early next year. So that would give some more leverage in terms of pricing, right? Then you say, okay, look, you can remove certain features in standard versus premium and things like that.
Yeah, I like that. That gives the vendors, the marketplace vendors, a lot more flexibility in delivering products.
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, we've asked the question on the data part of it. Yes, it's acknowledged, but then I'm not sure, how long. I mean, it's a big change to put that in.
Oh yeah.
One last question. Implementation. Is that something that professional services are provided, or is it because it's a marketplace app and it's specific for Jira right now? I mean, is it something that like a Jira admin could set up pretty easily?
Yeah, I think what we wanted to do was make it as simple as possible in installing it. So it's a couple of clicks, like any other app, it installs. Are there potential for professional services coming in? I think there is. Whenever it comes to data is typically very messy. If you want to export something out, for example, right, you'll get a JSON or a C. We allow the data export data format to be JSON or CSV, depending on what you choose. If you have to go do something with that, I think there are, again, not a standard case, but if there is an export thing coming in, then that's where I see professional services have a role.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
I think I'm good.
All right. Any other topics anybody wants to bring up, just in general, like throw out here for the community?
Maybe let me ask a question again, since again I'm more interested on the security side. Putting data security aside, the question which we were discussing earlier about least privileges, user access. Maybe Patrick, in your case, you have 1,500 users. How do you control who has access to what? And people change jobs or roles within a large organization. What accesses do they have? They change, right? I mean, as you evolve, somebody's promoted or moves to a different department, but they still have access to a different department's data. How is that sort of managed? Again, it goes to the least privileges part. You're on mute, sorry.
We follow the least privileges, to try and minimize, access as needed. About 2 years ago, we went through, a couple of us went through and totally rebuilt a new permission scheme that was based on, the need to have access, and that from everything from read only to site admin. We even tightened down who actually had administrator privileges, and then that new permission scheme then allowed us to then take that with the use of user groups, because we also have very highly focused on user groups. Then between those two, we were able to create permissions at a project level that is easily managed, both either at the project level or within a group level. Just based on how many people we put in those groups. And so far, it's been pretty good. And and we made it diverse enough that that there's minimal explicit permissions that we need to do on the JIRA project. Pretty much people are in a group. The only explicit permissions we do at the project level are, who's going to be a project admin, to be able to control fixed versions and whatnot. A product, here are the roles we basically set up: project admin, product owner. We have general users, which will have read-only access, and then people in that department or that group will have read-write access. Then we've got developers, QA, and then each of those two groups have a lead. So a dev lead and a QA lead. So that's pretty much all the roles that we have, and that pretty much fits everybody's needs. And then the only explicit assignments that we do are the product owner, dev lead, and QA lead, and the admin. That's it. Everything else. So most projects only have 4-ish explicit permissions, where we actually assign a user to a role. All the others are assigned through the JIRA user groups. And at some point we might tie that to Active Directory, but as nice as that would be, I think it would actually be a real pain in the butt too. So I'm hoping that we never do that. We do use SSO though, which I love. I love that aspect of it.
Do you audit this every so often, or is there a need to audit?
Yeah, we do audit because every once in a while we find that that the users switched, or maybe even not with the company yet anymore, and we see that that audit will show that, hey, we need to go deactivate that user. And then there's been many times where I'll do an export of all the users from, we use manage accounts, where we can manage all across many domains. And so I'll sometimes export that to a CSV and then view that, and then we have people that will kind of go through and look for duplicates and whatnot. And we also use that too as to sort, based on the last access. There's been many times where we've seen that a user hasn't logged in 6 months, so deactivate. Why pay the bill for them? So that audit is something we should probably do more often, but to see who's not using it, or do we have duplicates? That's become a big issue too, with duplicates. The way Atlassian allows users to self register, that's a huge headache. And I could go on for another hour on that issue and what we've done to circumvent and correct those issues. But for the most part, to get back to the topic, that one permission scheme that that we put a lot of thought into it to be versatile for all groups, to offer very tight controls, but yet also it allows us to be pretty loose if we need to as well. So we did some tweaks right after we got it. After we completed it, then we tweaked it a little bit, but it's been pretty solid for the last couple of years. So I highly recommend everybody to go do that. Review your permission scheme, and that's a great place to start, because you'll really learn. It's not always clear what each permission level within JIRA what kind of permissions they have. So we learned a lot about that, and learned a lot about where our weak points are because of that. And one that I'll say we have right now that I really hope Jira would tighten up is, in order to allow somebody to create fixed versions, they have to have admin rights on that project, and that's kind of frustrating, because with that, then they can change the board. They can, we don't have it set up where they can't delete tickets. Our permission scheme is set up that way where that won't happen, but they can goof up the board pretty bad. And I've seen some projects where the project admin, generally the scrum master or the dev manager, will go in, and rather than using user groups, because they don't have access to user groups. So one project had like 500 explicit users listed. It was a service management. It was actually our corp IT that did it. I think it was more like 800 users were on that list that they had explicitly added. It was insane, so it's easy to go off on a tangent like what happened there when you don't understand the how it all works. So it was really a great exercise for us to go through that, and then we really learned a lot about how it all works.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Sorry I made a short story long there.
JSM is so bad. That's usually where you find the worst infractions on setting up permissions and giving workflows that are way overly complicated. And
reason I asked about permissions is we are going through SOC 2, and the auditor, again, we are small, so it's easy for me to go and say, oh, look, these are the people, here's the permission list. Again, not that complicated, but then if I can extrapolate that, if you're even 100 people organization, imagine the auditor coming and saying, hey, tell me who does what, why does this person have this permission? That could be a nightmare. So that's why I asked, how do you manage that?
We're going through a SOC audit also. Fun stuff. SOC 2 audit.
those are no joke. All right. Anything else anyone want to bring up?
Good.
All right. If nobody else has anything they want to bring up, I guess we can go ahead and wrap this up. Vish, just one more time, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time and very helpful information. Thank you for reaching out and also for putting this together.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate, I know small audience, but this is where it's more fun to have a discussion rather than a monologue. So thank you to each of you.
Yes, thank you very much, Vish. I wasn't aware that products like yours exist, so that's great to know too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Right. All right, you guys have a good rest of the evening, and thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Good
Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.